7th and 8th grade. How you doing? It's Harry Pedigo, and we're here today to talk about literature. And I want to remind you guys that while we're away from school, this is an excellent opportunity to be catching up and really crushing AR goals, right? And I want you to be thinking about that, especially if you're in 7th grade. How can I really read for understanding and push myself in order to learn new things and to set, goals for myself and foster discipline, self-reliance, etc. So keep that in mind. Really want you guys pushing hard on AR. If you guys are starting to work on your newsletters now, remember that we want very direct writing that focuses on a particular theme or subject. Some of these articles within the newsletter are kind of up to you to come up with an idea or a thesis or a direction. But above all, you want your writing to be clear, concise, and focused. You want there to be a clear beginning and purpose. Think about it like a journey, and you want to get to the destination as effectively and as quickly as possible. You don't want to rush your writing, but direction is key with writing. I'll be making some suggestions on your work as we go along. Okay, with that being said, AR, focus on that. Make sure that if you're starting to draft that you are being very clear, concise, focused with special attention to your grammar and spelling. It's crucial. You guys need to be able to pull that out from within you. You know what I mean? You want to be self-reliant. You want to be excellent in your work. 8th grade, I want to turn your attention, and any 7th graders interested, I want to turn your attention. We're looking at book 6 of the Iliad. And so book 6, I'm looking at it right now, kind of where we're starting. It starts with basically a segue kind of from book 5 to book 6. We're still in the midst of this combat. The fight's still going on. And the beginning of book 6 is like a recap. It reminds me almost of like a recap on a television show, like what happened last week. Talk about Diomedes killing people, talk about Ajax killing people, and it's just like it's a summary of like if you missed the last episode. So that's kind of cool, and that's basically the first lines 1 through roughly 30 are basically just a summary of what's happened before. And it's good for you to be able to read that and understand what's going on. As far as the beginning of book 6 goes, I mentioned in the last lecture that this book really is about comparing and contrasting ideas of honor and bravery and characters who have different views on that subject. And there's no better place to look at than lines like roughly 40 through 60 on page 95, because that's where we see Menelaus ultimately try to take, instead of killing a Trojan warrior, to take him for ransom and to spare his life as his heart was touched. And he tries to take him for ransom instead of just killing him, which I know that he was motivated by ransom, but at the same time, it shows his humanity, which is something that humanity is demonstrated by Menelaus and Diomedes in particular. They're both very humane, honorable warriors. And if we get into look at, for instance, if I were reading this book as a 7th and 8th grader, I would be looking very interested in lines 51 through 61, because that is the crux of the difference of opinion between Lord Agamemnon and Menelaus. I'm going to read that part, okay? It says, Menelaus's heart was touched, and he was about to have his attendant take him back to the camp when Agamemnon came running over, indignant. Menelaus, you simpleton, how can you show such tender concern for a Trojan life? Did the Trojans treat you so generously when they were your honored guest at your own palace? No, we must leave not a single Trojan alive, not even a baby boy that his mother still holds in her womb. Not even one must slip from our hands. All the males must be slaughtered, every last male in Troy, unmourned and unburied. So that last line, 61, talks about really just murdering these people, these Trojan warriors, without any sympathy or remorse, and not treating their bodies with respect. You see that in a lot of, even in more recent times. You think about the Civil War and the importance of getting the body of a fallen soldier back to their home so they can be properly buried. That's a big theme in literature and in history, the way we treat our foes in battle. And Agamemnon does not seem to have a real humane grasp on that. And we see how he ultimately kills the Trojan warrior in lines 62 through 64:5. So that's a really crazy part. I want you to think about that as in your writing, in your reading, and also in regard to history. The way that we behave under certain circumstances, much like Menelaus and Agamemnon had different ways of behaving, really can make or break your honor, right? So that's kind of something to think about. And you could be thinking about, if you're a seventh grader, you're thinking about that as well. You could be like, well, how are the characters in my AR book still demonstrating or giving me as a reader the same lessons that this very ancient text and narrative of the Iliad is giving to the older kids, right? Because you see that a lot. Think about how your character is acting under certain, certain strife, certain struggle, right? Think about, are they behaving in an honorable way? Are there characters who are behaving more honorably than other ones? It's interesting. On page 96, we see a really interesting character pop up. And this is the last thing I'll mention, but it just shows that, when reading these books, we need to take our time and try to use context clues to understand what's happening, because that's how we take tests. It's how we write or understand things that are dense. We try to understand the words, the phrase, the situation in the context, right? You do that a lot, like in a vocabulary test. You might say, okay, well, that word in this context probably means this. It's a very valuable lesson, and this is an excellent one to look at. So I'm on line 75, 76. It says, and the Trojans would have been driven back inside the walls of Troy, overcome by their own weakness. So it sounds from what we just read there that the Trojans, the tides have somewhat turned, and the Trojans are actually kind of getting beaten down by the Achaeans. If Helenus, now Helenus is an interesting character. It's sometimes in different translations Helenos, son of Priam, the wisest of those who can scan the flight patterns of birds. That's odd. The wisest of those who could scan the flight patterns of birds. So I hope you would be able to come up with a understanding of what that is. But if you think about how the Greeks and Romans, we know the story of Romulus and Remus, they looked for different signs as to be who would be the ruler of Rome, and they looked for the flight patterns of birds, right? And so Helenus, or Helenos, is a soothsayer, like I mentioned in the introduction to this week, and this person is somebody who is like an oracle, who can see the future, who can offer suggestions, much like how King David would interpret dreams. And he ultimately is going to tell them that they need to go and appease the gods, especially Athena, who was locked in on the side of the Trojan warriors. So you see, again, the gods playing a major role in here. We see Helenus, we understand that he's a soothsayer or a fortune teller, wizard, whatever, from the context of this in our knowledge of Roman history, because we know that the Romans and the Greeks often would look towards the birds for understanding and signs from the gods. And again, they're appealing to the gods. They're trying to get the gods in their corner, so to speak. You know what I mean? So I hope that you have a good time reading that. It's really interesting, and it's some lovely language, especially when Helenus is talking on line 75 to like 100. So enjoyed that. Again, keep up with AR direction and writing. You got to stay very focused. Write slow. Write slow. It's not a race. Take your time with it. Same thing with reading. Take your time with it. You want to write for the understanding of your audience, and you want to read for the understanding of yourself. I'll be in touch. You guys take care.